proof, and defense may call your first witness.
Your Honor, before we call our first witness, we had reserved an opening statement.
That's correct, I'm sorry. I did, if you recall, allow the defense to reserve their opening statement for the beginning of their proof, and so I will now allow the defense to make that opening statement.
The last time that I spoke with you, I told you that we would respect your verdict, and we do. We also previously told you that the trial would not be a meaningless exercise. By your verdict, you have determined that Stephen Wiggins will never again be free. Before I tell you what you're going to hear in this case, it's important that you understand how different this phase of the proceedings are from the last phase. In the last phase, you were the trier of fact. You determined what happened and whether Stephen Wiggins did the things he was accused of. This decision you're going to be making in this phase of the proceeding is a moral decision. You're going to be asked to make a personal, moral decision. Now, when we were in jury selection, we discussed with you that a death sentence only results if all 12 of you, in making this personal, moral decision, decide that a death sentence is necessary. But if one or more of you decides for your own personal reasons, after listening to all of the evidence, considering everything you've heard, hearing the arguments and the jury instructions the court just told you you're going to hear, that a life sentence without the possibility of parole is sufficient to punish Stephen Wiggins and protect the community, then there won't be a death sentence. But each and every one of you decides for yourself. And because each and every one of you decides for yourself, and it's this personal moral decision, then the law never requires a death sentence. Now, this sentencing hearing is not simply going to be about the crime. It's going to be about Stephen Wiggins' life. If it were only about the crime, then his life story and these mitigating circumstances that you've heard so much about in jury selection, and that you all told the court that you would give meaningful consideration to, would be meaningless. It wouldn't be necessary. But it is necessary and it's required. And you all repeatedly assured us in the court that at this phase of the trial, you could do just that. You will recall during jury selection, we discussed many times about you have to assume that you would get to this point and try to put yourself in that mindset of when I'm in this position that you are today, I could now give meaningful consideration to this mitigation evidence. And the court's going to tell you, it's up to each of you to decide what is mitigating and how much weight to give to it. Some of you might give the weight of life to certain mitigating circumstances you're going to hear. For example, things like the terror and sexual assaults and physical abuse inflicted by Stephen's father on him and others, whether that warped his development and his moral compass. You may decide that that's a reason to punish him for something less than the death penalty. That is, give it the weight of life. Or the fact that Stephen has helped others in his life. How you will hear in this case that he actually saved the life of a coworker. That may be relevant to you, but it might not be relevant to another juror. And you could give that the weight of life. But you have to remember, this isn't a counting exercise. This isn't you just count up all of these mitigating circumstances. There's no magic number you have to reach. A single mitigating factor, a single piece of mitigating evidence could be the reason that you in your individual moral judgment decides to give that circumstance the weight of life. You have to decide whether that mitigating evidence is going to be sufficient or appropriate to grant mercy. Not because Stephen Wiggins deserves it, but whether what you hear about Stephen's life, what you hear about his experiences, you find in your heart that mercy should be extended to him. Your decision this past Thursday, well, by that, you've decided that Mr. Wiggins will never, ever set foot outside of a prison again. That's already decided. The next few days, though, what you're going to be deciding is something even more serious. Our society gives two punishments that are considered the worst: the death sentence and life without the possibility of parole. But it's important, as we discussed during jury selection, that you understand this. Nothing we are going to present to you in the next few days is meant to excuse or justify what happened here. And nothing changes the fact of what you will hear, that Mr. Wiggins will never get out of prison. We're going to provide you evidence that we think is important for you to make this decision of life or death. These mitigating circumstances that you've heard about during jury selection. Again, we're not presenting it as a justification, and we discussed this at length during jury selection. We are past that point. But it's evidence that we believe are compelling reasons that the life without the possibility of parole is more appropriate than death. None of it's an excuse. None of it is a justification as to how Stephen Wiggins may have acted as an adult. That's not why we're presenting this evidence. But the question is going to be whether Stephen gets executed by the state of Tennessee. And it's our job, and it's our responsibility, and it's even a privilege to give you these reasons. Now, you might say, why is it a privilege? It's because, as you can imagine, we've spent a lot of time gathering information about Stephen Wiggins' life, about his history, about the struggles that he has faced. And we're going to present you those reasons now why you should not impose a death sentence. Again, not an excuse for what he did. These are mitigating circumstances that you have sworn to give meaningful consideration to. And now's that time. So I'm going to give you a roadmap about some of this evidence that you're going to hear over the next couple of days. Each of you are going to listen to this yourself. You're going to hear the same evidence, you're going to hear the same arguments, and the same instructions from the court when we've completed our presentation to you. But again, you all have to come to your own individual conclusions on this. This is not, it's your own moral decision. It's a moral decision, not exactly like you did before. Now it's about you as a person, how you feel about these things. And we assume that you're going to trust each other and respect each other's decisions in this process. Because while you're all hearing the same information, in the end, you must make your own moral decision. So let's talk about some of the things you're going to hear over the next couple of days that you haven't heard so far. Stephen Wiggins' mother was severely beaten by his father while she was pregnant with Stephen. Stephen started getting beaten by his father before he ever came out of the womb. And he was born with a damaged brain. He has a hole in his brain. He has dead brain matter. And you're going to see and hear evidence of that during this trial. You will see the PET scans, the MRIs, and you're going to hear from experts who are going to talk about this. And I will remind you over and over again, we're not talking about excuses for behavior. We're talking about reasons, the circumstances of his life. So you take someone who's getting beaten before he's born with organic brain damage, and that's how he starts out life. Not surprisingly, he had seizures, continues to have seizures throughout his entire life, which evidences the damaged brain. Doesn't excuse his behavior for what he did in this case. We're past the excuses. This is not a justification. But it will help you determine what the appropriate punishment is here. Stephen Wiggins' father, Scott Wiggins, he was mentally disturbed and medically untreated, which led to a violent and terrifying presence in Stephen's life for the majority of his childhood. He terrorized Stephen and the rest of the family while Stephen was growing up. He terrorized other members of the family before Stephen was even born. Those are some of the people you're going to hear from in this case. He was born into a violent, almost unspeakable environment with the organic brain damage on top of that. There was severe physical, sexual, and emotional abuse inflicted by Stephen's father. And again, not talking about excuses for behavior. These are things that you have to give meaningful consideration to in deciding what's appropriate here. A lot of people talk about, well, I had a tough childhood. You're not going to hear about a tough childhood. You're going to hear about a childhood where it was daily physical, psychological abuse. Beatings for no reason. When Stephen and his brother couldn't fall asleep at night, his father's solution to that was to beat them until they went to sleep or just quit fighting. He would beat them with anything he could reach, fishing poles, his fists, his belt, daily. This wasn't once or twice. Stephen Wiggins saw his mother beaten when she would try to intervene. And this went on every day until he was about 14 years old, when Stephen's father chased him and his mother through the woods, shooting at them with a rifle, trying to kill them. And when they did finally get away, Stephen's father doused their mobile home with gasoline in an attempt to kill them. The environment Stephen grew up in was one where his father isolated the family like many abusers do. He didn't let them have friends. He didn't let them go places. He kept the door locked with multiple deadbolts and all of the windows covers because in his paranoia, he told the family, well, the police are going to come kill you at any minute. Ridiculous things like that were said to children, not once or twice, but every day for well over a decade. The brain damage that I've talked to you about when Stephen did this horrific act and he killed Sergeant Baker, that brain damage was untreated. But since he's been in custody and been observed for years now, he has been treated, and you'll hear about this, with powerful antipsychotic drugs and seizure medicine that has helped him to now be successful and manage his day-to-day life. Since he's been in jail and treated with these medications, he's not had any violent encounters with staff, who you'll hear from, or other inmates. You heard a little bit about the co-defendant in this case. She was not on trial here. But as a mitigating circumstances, you can consider that Erica Castro Miles shares some responsibility in what happened. Despite the environment he grew up in and the brain damage that you're going to hear about, he's not one-dimensional. It would be easy just to paint him with one brush and say, well, he's this act that happened in May of 2018. But he has, as you would hope, done some good in his life. He's done things, as I mentioned, like saving a coworker who had a heart attack. He fireman carries him out of a pit and gets him to the hospital and saves his life, and you'll hear from this man. Stephen had one respite in his childhood, and that was his mother's father, his maternal grandfather. That was the only place he could go and get a break. Unfortunately, that grandfather had a stroke around the age when Stephen was around 10 years of age. He ended up being in the house, hooked up on a number of machines, and then he passed away. Before he died, Stephen, as a child, learned to operate all of his equipment. As a child, he learned to clean out his tracheotomy so that his grandfather could breathe. He learned how to take his blood pressure. He did everything the nurse did except give him shots. And he did that when he was 10, 11, 12 years old. So he has done good things in his life, and you'll hear about those as well. Those don't excuse or justify what he did. It doesn't wipe away the terrible thing he did. But again, now we're talking about reasons that you would consider life. Stephen's mother, his aunt, his other family members, and most importantly, Stephen's son, Spencer, who's 10 years old, love him. And you will hear from some of those witnesses as well. Stephen has offered to plead guilty and receive a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. You will hear that. All the other factors you will hear as well in the next couple of days, such as his background, his life, his experiences, and anything else that arises from all of this evidence you're going to hear. It could encourage you, one or more of you, to extend mercy to him and vote for a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Ever mindful that you're not looking for excuses or to justify what he did. We're past that now. And you've repeatedly promised us in the court that you would do just that. You would give meaningful consideration to this evidence, and I trust that you will. Because it's up to you to determine what's appropriate now. Whether he should spend the rest of his days in a concrete and steel box, around strangers, where he may one day die of natural causes, and whether that alone is sufficiently harsh, whether that's an appropriate sentence for him to die and under those circumstances. And you'll hear the court's instructions at the end after we present all of our mitigation evidence. And only if all 12 of you decide unanimously that a death sentence is appropriate, then that's what will happen. But if you don't, then you'll be asked to consider life without parole or release. So what I'm asking you today is that you give this evidence the meaningful consideration that you all swore that you would do. You said in your questionnaires you could. You told us in Knoxville that you would. And now is the time to do it. After you've heard all of that, we'll be asking you to vote in favor of life without the possibility of parole for Stephen Wiggins. And I'm thanking you now in advance, for I know the time and attention that it's going to take. And I appreciate your giving this the meaningful consideration that you're required now to do.
Does the state wish to make any other statement?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Counsel, approach the bench, please.